Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Need to Know, a series of video interviews with companies who are shaping, creating, and innovating in the games industry today, and whose work will have a huge impact going forward into the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Stace Harman, co-founder and director of Indie by Design. Hi, Stace. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Leo. Yeah, really good. How are you?
Fantastic. Yes, I'm very good. Thank you. Very good. Wonderful to have you. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me here today in this conversation. I'll get you to introduce yourself in just a moment. But for our viewers' benefit, our talk today will be discussing review guides, everything you need to know about them, how to put them together, and things to think about. So, Stace, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and who Indie by Design are and what you're all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm Stace Harman. As Leo mentions, I'm the co-founder and director of Indie by Design, which is a consultancy company primarily focusing on game design, media communications, and product viability. I co-founded the company with John Robertson almost 10 years ago now, and we work with a variety of developers from kind of small two-person teams, bedroom coders, up to mid-sized indie teams and platform holders, publishers, and everybody in between. Really for pretty much every stage of a game's life cycle, from the initial conceptualization and ideation all the way through to release and beyond. And yes, and today we're kind of focusing on a small part of that cycle, which is the review guide. So once the game's ready and you're ready to kind of push it out the door, be that from a developer or from a publisher standpoint, then how do you go about creating a review guide, what you should be including, and some just a couple of what not to do as well.
Fantastic. So yes, should we jump in then? Review guides then. What are they, and what's their purpose? What are they trying to achieve?
Yeah, so a review guide is it can be thought of as is its purpose is dualfold. There's the ability to convey your own message as a developer or a publisher about the game and frame some pieces of key information in the way that you ideally want them to be written about. And then the flip side of that is that you're providing information to reviewers in order for them to do their job. So some of that is logistical information. Some of it is around things like embargo dates and SKUs and platforms and prices and things like that. But it's really kind of, it serves as the last opportunity just before that game is released to nudge media to kind of coax them into your way of thinking and provide them with the tools that they need to convey that information to their audiences and really show your game in the best possible light.
Fantastic. Okay, interesting. So what sort of opportunities does a review guide offer reviewers then?
So there's ample. There's quite a few opportunities. So from the game maker's perspective, so that be that a developer or a publisher, you're really looking to provide that information to the reviewers for them to do their job, but also doing that in a way that contextualizes your game in the way that you want it to be thought about. So there is a notion of kind of framing your game for success, and some of that is highlighting the ways in which some of your design philosophies, the key design pillars that you've used to create your game, and conveying that information to press so that when they're assessing how good a job you've done, essentially, how entertaining is this thing, does it meet its design goals, you're providing them with that information in order to frame their thinking rather than kind of look for external validators like what your competitors are doing or what the genre peers are doing. So it's really to give people a kind of a measuring stick of your own making to say, this is the stuff that you should be thinking about. This is how we would like you to think about this game when you're reviewing it. And then you can determine kind of how successful we've been in those goals. That is sometimes easier said than done. It's a there's a sweet spot to be had with review guides where you're trying to provide the information that press are going to need, that media are going to need to assess your game and also to talk about your game. But whilst also kind of maybe trying to nudge them into certain directions to talk about it in a certain way, or to highlight certain key features. Um, Sometimes that means kind of it means framing the thoughts around the features in your game as unique aspects, or as kind of framing the most positive, interesting elements, and the bits that perhaps reviewers either depending on how long your game is, maybe they might not get to when they're in reviewing your game, or they might forget about. So it acts as a frame of reference in order for them to, once they've played through your game, to go back and to find the key bits of information, but also for you to kind of call out, say, different combinations of the way that your systems works, or the way that maybe weapons work in your game, or the narrative threads of your game. And it's to give them kind of the another way of thinking about it, as though you were kind of in the room with them, and maybe they've picked out some stuff that they think is really cool, and you can kind of be there to say, oh, and also, did you see this other thing, and have you thought about it in this way? And what that's doing, it's great for you as the person whose game it is, or whose game you're publishing, but it also gives media something more to write about, or to talk to their audience about. And particularly where perhaps you're launching into, say, a particularly busy release window, and reviewers are very busy, or again, if your game is kind of particularly long, it's not always easy to kind of have that, to keep all of the moving pieces in mind when it comes to sitting down to writing the review, particularly when you're up against the deadline. So it's to yeah, it's to provide a second bite of the cherry, effectively, a second opportunity to reconvey those elements of your game that you think are particularly strong, and to make sure that the reviewer has all of the information available to do things like give things in your game the right labels, or so that they're not referring to them just as sort of a colloquial, like, oh, that purple triangle thing, or whatever it might be. You're actually making sure that they have a reference point to go back and dig into that information. Um, and on the flip side of that, it can also serve to help strengthen maybe the weaker parts of your game. So if, for example, maybe tutorialization isn't a strong suit, maybe you've kind of done the best that you can with implementing a tutorial, but you feel like there might be areas of your game that could just do with a little bit more explanation. You can also highlight that information in the review guide in order to make sure that things don't get misunderstood, or make sure that reviewers have an easy way of conveying that information to an audience, and they're not spending too much time trying to work out how things actually function, and they're spending more time kind of focusing on the cool stuff.
Absolutely. I think some of that organic discovery process is definitely part of some games' identity, and that's some of the thing that they want to, for their players to experience, and ultimately for a reviewer, there's probably not enough time to achieve all that and to
Not
get the
always.
full overview, really.
Mm.
Out of curiosity, Stace, are review guides something that reviewers expect to receive, or can they be received badly?
I mean,
Curious.
they can have some. They have had historically something of a hit and miss, kind of checkered past. It's about striking the right balance with this, because it's very easy to want to highlight absolutely everything that your game does, and the name of every single character, or how their relationships pan out, as well as all of the kind of the core information, like the product information, as well as tips and tricks, and here's a nice map of the world, and also here's a controller layout for mouse and keyboard and controllers, and so, as you can imagine, it's quite easy to go overboard and include absolutely everything. And I think sometimes historically that has been what a review guide is. It can stand in as uh, just really a duplication of the information that's already available in the game. So things like a key binding and a controller layout, it's very rare that a reviewer is going to need that information in front of them, either on a PDF or on a physical piece of paper. That's the game takes care of that stuff. The game's going to teach you how to jump, how to interact, how to move through the world. So it is possible to have kind of kind of have redundant information and have too much that so that when a reviewer picks that review guide up or flicks through it on a screen, they look at it and say, well, this is just far too much information, and the bits I've looked at don't seem that useful, so I'm just not going to engage at all. So it very much is about striking the right balance of providing useful information, but also not being too worried about having to hit every single text label and every single character name and weapon, as I mentioned. So yes, it's not something that is necessarily it's not essential by any means. I mean, you can certainly send out review code without a review guide, but it does, when thought about in the way of being your kind of last chance before launch, to just add any additional information, add any kind of contextual information or any flavor to your game. When thought about in those terms, it becomes more attractive. It can feel less like a chore to provide that information, and more like, okay, I have an opportunity here to really frame this in the best way that I can. So that's the way that we speak to our clients about trying to think about it. And it's not always easy to do that, because you're on the home stretch. Everybody's working more or less flat out. Depending on the resources in your team, it's not an easy thing to have somebody take a step back and then start pulling together a lot of this information. But it can make a difference, not just to the people that are definitely going to review your game, but it can also make a difference to the people that might review a game. That a good review guide sent with a game key can sometimes nudge them. They can flick through that rather than needing to install the game to get a feel for what your game is. They can flick through the review guide instead and say, okay, well, the information's nicely laid out here. I understand what this thing is. I understand the tone and the emotion that the developers are expecting the players to feel. And this seems like something that I could get on board with. So it can serve those purposes, both as being informational and aspirational, and also as a bit of an advert for your game as well. If you've been able to allocate the resources to do it to a good standard.
Absolutely. So I think it'd be really, really helpful to sort of run through a couple of the things that I guess a strong review guide would include, and also maybe hit on some things what to avoid and what not to include, ideally.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the core information that needs to be included is around the notion of informational. So it's logistical information, it's dates that your game's coming out, it's the platforms it's coming out on, it's embargo dates, it's if there is a sort of a dedicated PR person, it's their contact details if anybody needs to reach out, or if you are a kind of a single indie developer, then having even if you don't have a kind of a standalone like PR contact, potentially just having a dedicated email address that you set up just to field queries from media around questions they might have about your game at review time can serve the purpose just as well. But so a lot of the logistical information is just placed there up front, so that, again, at a glance, press can take a look at that, media can take a look at that, and just have that information to stick in a kind of a neat little box out that goes in their review, be it in print or in video or online, wherever it is. And then alongside that, there's the more functional information. So that's things about, like, you as a developer, so your studio, you personally. It's things about any kind of product or franchise history, if this is a sequel or if this is a successor to game X, and also just what else you've done. It can help. Again, it's just kind of about providing media with another another angle, another flavor to add to their review, or even just some of their like write up. If maybe they're not even intending to do a review, but you've given them more information that they can use to kind of craft coverage that includes the information that you're looking for them to include. Um, and along those lines, so a developer's note, something that takes that opportunity to contextualize what this game is, why you've created it, what you're hoping players are going to feel, and invites media to enjoy and it's really about kind of sculpting an experience for the media as well as the players, as well as sort of the public players eventually. It's really like you want media to have a good time playing your game. They're playing it for work, fine, but you want them to have kind of a good time whilst they're doing that. Um, and then it's about selecting the key bits of information, identifying what the core pillars really and the core features of your game are, and then structuring your review guide around those. So that might be something as simple as, in a beat 'em up, well, my core interaction is combat, so we're gonna have kind of a lot of we're going to use that as a hook upon which to hang some information. But it can also be more kind of whimsical than that. You can have kind of a page or two that just talks about the backstory of your world, the elements that are important. But it's really about picking those core elements and using those as a lens through which to invite the media to view your game through, rather than, as I say, rather than trying to like list every system and every kind of interaction, and because that does lead to bloat, which is one of the things to avoid here, is to not worry too much. Like, your game is going to do the heavy lifting in this instance. The review guide is supplemental, it is optional, and you don't, we all hope that if somebody sits down to play your game without a review guide, they're going to just have a great time regardless, as eventually the player base will. So uh knowing that, not worrying about putting absolutely everything in, um and potentially overwhelming people that come to your game and have a look at your review guide. And then some of those other things I mentioned earlier. So avoiding kind of fuzzy or vague language, of using the text that labels that you've used in the game, for your health system, or for your collectibles, or for your upgrade trees, whatever you've called them in the game. It's about using that same language here, so that there's no kind of disassociation or no confusion that you've called it one thing in the game and one thing in the review guide. It's just making sure those labels are consistent, and also so that the media can sit down and just look at your review guide and pull those labels out without needing to boot the game back up. So avoiding fuzzy and vague language. I think generally avoiding comparisons to other games. You don't need to say that this game is a mashup of X meets Y. That's often for the media to decide that, really. Like, you might want to push a certain kind of, I'm just going to pick the best games out there and say that my game is a mashup of, Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, and that's not necessarily a useful or favorable comparison. But by extension, to also not apologize for what your game is. If you worked to a tight deadline, if you worked to a very small budget, if you created a game as an indie developer whilst working a kind of a full-time regular day job, you can highlight that element, but you should never feel the need to apologize for that, and feel that it should be something more. So I think those are kind of, those last ones are the key ones to avoid. But it's really to identify those core pillars and use those as a way of conveying the information, and in a way that you would be happy for your game to be talked about. We talk to our clients about the notion of creating a review guide that is, if somebody were to be pushed for time, or if somebody had forgotten completely about one of the systems in your game, and then they go and look it up in the review guide, if they were to cut and paste that language from your review guide and use it in their review, you would be happy with that because you framed it in such a way that is is true and is educational, but is also aspirational. So that's one of the key aims of a review guide is to be both educational and aspirational. And yeah, that's if you're hitting those pillars and those milestones, then you shouldn't go too far wrong.
Well, that's fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so and what would you say were the approaches to creating this review guide? What how should people begin, and what should it sort of look like, I guess?
Yeah. So mostly it's largely it's however you're most comfortable conveying this information because yes, kind of ideally perhaps you create something that is, effectively like a companion piece to your game. It's kind of part information, part kind of art book. Like, yeah, ideally that would be great. You create something and it looks amazing and it looks like the kind of thing you could print out and put on a shelf as a companion piece. Not everybody has the time or the resources or the particular skill set to produce something like that. So really it's about conveying the information in the way that best suits you. If you're doing it yourself, if you're having somebody else do it for you, then that's a different story. You can liaise a bit on that and kind of talk about how best to identify the core parts of your game, and then and leave some of the design stuff to somebody else. But really, the so it could, it can be as basic as a Word doc. It can just be any given Word document software, and it's 20 pages, 30 pages of A4 Word doc. It can be that. Something that is more has a more aesthetic kind of visual design leaning is more attractive. It is the thing that catches people's eye so that they pick it up in the first place or they flick through it on their screen in the first place. Um, but really it's about conveying your information in kind of in a passionate and knowledgeable way and calling out the things that are strongest about your game and doing that in the way that you are most comfortable with. Um, it that can be a video, it can be a way. It's not as it's not as easy to reference a video. It's not as easy to look back on that. But in terms of like if you're delivering your developer note, if you're delivering an introduction to who you are and who your studio is, certainly there's no harm in including a link to a video of you providing that information and kind of greeting the media. Um, but it's yeah, it's just providing the information in that way, just linking back to that idea that this is one of the last times, if not the last time, that you will get to kind of stand, just behind the media or perch on their shoulder and point the things out that you want to. And it's the last time you're going to get to do that before launch. So whichever way you feel best suits those ends, then go with it that way. Review guides is something that we do at Indie by Design. We do have some samples that people can download and just kind of have a look more as motivation or as inspiration. Obviously, we're also always happy to have conversations with people about the production of these kinds of things. But really, in terms of providing that information, there's some samples that we've got, which we'll link to in the description that you can take a look at, and just to have an understanding of either the ideas that you should be thinking about or what's possible, and being confident with it, and just not worrying overly much. It's really just is about you supplementing what your game already is. And yeah, the way that however you're most comfortable with doing that is kind of the best way to do it. And yeah, and remember that it's an optional piece. It isn't essential. It can, and I think does strengthen the overall kind of press kit that you provide to reviewers, to media. So and it doesn't have to be something that gets pulled together at the 11th hour. It is something that you can be kind of creating alongside the game. But yeah, if anybody does want to have those conversations, then we're here. But otherwise, we kind of want to empower you to do that too. And again, there isn't always the timeline or the budget or the desire to kind of go external on something like that. So So certainly having a go at that yourself and using perhaps having a look at those samples to use those as inspiration, I think is a good place to start.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Stace. As you said, link in the description for those case studies. And yeah, thank you so much for talking to us today. That was really insightful, and thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for
Um,
having me. It's good
no
fun.
worries at all. And thank you today for our audience who have tuned in to catch this video. There's plenty of other need to know videos out there on our Ukie TV channel on YouTube. And thank you for joining this one and more soon. Thank you so much.